Dexter Morgan hid who he really was, but the people around him felt it. Every major character in his life hated specific things about him. Some hated him because they knew the truth. Others hated him because they sensed something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Today, I'm breaking down what every major character hated about Dexter Morgan and why those feelings were completely justified. Let's start with Deborah, because her relationship with Dexter is the most tragic in the entire series. Deborah hated Dexter's emotional distance long before she knew he was a serial killer. She'd come to him with real problems like breakups, career stress, family issues, and Dexter would just stare at her with his blank expression. He'd give generic advice that sounded supportive but had no real emotion behind it. She hated his constant lying about everything: where he was going, what he was doing, why he disappeared in the middle of important moments. Deborah would ask simple, direct questions, and he'd dodge or deflect. After years of this, she stopped expecting honest answers, but that didn't make it hurt less. She hated how he was always disappearing when she needed him most. Deborah would be going through something serious, and Dexter would just vanish. His excuses were always vague. Something came up at work, he had to check on something, he'd be back soon. But Deborah needed her brother, and he was never actually there for her. The worst part came after Deborah discovered the truth about what Dexter really was. She hated how he manipulated her sense of right and wrong. Her entire moral foundation had been built around protecting and trusting her brother. She was a cop who believed in justice and the law, but Dexter was a serial killer operating right under her nose. That realization destroyed everything she thought she knew about herself and her family. She hated being forced to protect him at the cost of herself. Once Deborah knew the truth, she had to make an impossible choice: turn in her brother and destroy her family, or cover up his crimes and become an accomplice to murder. Whatever she chose would destroy her, and she hated Dexter for putting her in that position. Covering Dexter's crimes destroyed Deborah mentally. She had to lie to her colleagues, she had to obstruct investigations, she had to kill LaGuerta to protect Dexter. Every day, she became less of the person she used to be. Deborah's entire downward spiral in the later seasons came from being forced to carry Dexter's secrets. She started drinking more, making reckless decisions, pushing people away. The relationship between Dexter and Deborah shows the core problem with Dexter as a person. He claimed to care about his sister. He said he'd do anything to protect her, but really he just dragged her into his darkness. He used her loyalty and love against her, and when she finally couldn't take it anymore, when the weight of his secrets broke her completely, he still didn't stop killing. Rita's hatred of Dexter was different because she never knew the full truth, but that almost makes it worse. Rita hated Dexter never being fully present in their relationship. Even when he was physically sitting next to her, his mind was somewhere else. She could tell he was distracted and distant, but she didn't know why. She hated feeling like she came second to something unknown. Rita could sense that Dexter had priorities that came before her and the kids, but she couldn't identify what those priorities were. There was this invisible barrier between them that she kept trying to break through and failing. She hated his cold reactions during emotional moments. When Rita needed emotional support or connection, Dexter would respond in ways that felt off. Sometimes he wouldn't react at all. Other times he'd say the right words but with no emotion behind them. It was like talking to someone reading lines from a script instead of actually feeling things. Rita would question herself constantly. Was she asking for too much? Was she being too needy? But really, Dexter just wasn't capable of giving her what she needed. His double life made real intimacy impossible. Harry Morgan's hatred of Dexter came from guilt and regret. Harry hated the guilt over creating the code. When Dexter was a child, Harry saw his dark tendencies and made a choice. Instead of getting Dexter real psychological help, Harry decided to train him to be a serial killer vigilante. Harry thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was channeling Dexter's darkness into something controlled and purposeful. But as Dexter got older, Harry realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Harry hated watching Dexter grow colder and more detached. Every kill made Dexter less human. The code was supposed to give Dexter purpose and control. Instead, it turned him into something Harry barely recognized. The more Dexter killed, the less emotion he showed, the less he connected with other people. Harry watched his son become a perfect killing machine and realized that's not what he wanted at all. The guilt consumed Harry until he couldn't live with it anymore. Harry realized too late that there was no good version of this situation. You can't train someone to be a good serial killer. Murder is murder regardless of who the victim is, and Harry had turned his own son into a killer. That realization destroyed Harry and ultimately led to his death. Sergeant Doakes hated Dexter from the very first episode, and his instincts were absolutely right. Doakes hated Dexter's fake friendliness. Everyone else in the department bought into Dexter's nice guy act, the helpful blood spatter analyst who brought donuts and smiled at everyone. But Doakes saw through it immediately. He knew that smile was fake. He hated Dexter's lack of emotional response to disturbing crime scenes. Everyone else would show some kind of reaction to brutal murders, disgust, anger, sadness, something. But Dexter would just calmly analyze the blood spatter like he was looking at a painting. That unnatural calmness was a huge red flag. Normal people don't react that way to violence and death. Doakes hated knowing Dexter was dangerous and being completely ignored. His instincts as a cop screamed that something was seriously wrong with Dexter, but when he tried to voice his concerns, people thought he was paranoid or jealous. They'd say he was being unreasonable or that he had a problem with Dexter for no good reason. That frustration of knowing the truth but not being able to prove it or convince anyone else drove Doakes absolutely crazy. Doakes dedicated significant time and energy to investigating Dexter. He followed him, watched him, tried to catch him doing something wrong, and Doakes was right about everything. Dexter was a serial killer. He was dangerous. He was fooling everyone. But by the time Doakes got close to proving it, it was too late. The tragedy of Doakes is that he was the only person in Miami Metro who saw Dexter clearly from the beginning. Lieutenant LaGuerta's hatred of Dexter developed gradually but intensely. She hated how Dexter was always conveniently close to major cases. He'd show up at crime scenes that weren't technically his jurisdiction. He'd insert himself into investigations that didn't require blood spatter analysis. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. She hated how Dexter kept slipping through suspicion. Every time someone started looking at him too closely, he'd have a perfect alibi or explanation. Evidence that should have pointed to him would mysteriously disappear or get contaminated. LaGuerta knew it wasn't luck, it was skill and planning. She hated realizing too late that Dexter was the real problem. When LaGuerta finally made the connection between Dexter and the Bay Harbor butcher case, it was devastating. She'd worked with him for years, trusted him, defended him against Doakes, and the whole time, Dexter was the serial killer they were hunting. LaGuerta's investigation into Dexter cost her everything. She became obsessed with proving he was guilty. Her colleagues thought she was losing it, and in the end, her pursuit of justice got her killed. Quinn hated Dexter's influence over Deborah. No matter what happened between Quinn and Deborah, she would always choose Dexter first. Quinn hired a private investigator to look into Dexter but could never prove his suspicions. The investigator ended up dead, and Quinn knew Dexter was involved but couldn't prove it. Batista genuinely liked Dexter, which makes his feelings more complicated. He hated Dexter's emotional walls. Batista was warm and open. He'd invite Dexter to events and try to connect, but Dexter never reciprocated that warmth. Batista hated seeing Dexter hurt Debra indirectly. Miguel Prado hated that Dexter kept secrets even after they became partners. Miguel shared his darkness with Dexter, but Dexter still held back. Miguel hated that Dexter chose the code over their friendship. When Miguel started killing people who didn't fit Dexter's rules, Dexter killed him. Trinity hated Dexter judging him while pretending to understand. Trinity hated seeing Dexter weak for wanting to have a normal life. From Trinity's perspective, Dexter was pathetic for trying to have genuine connections. Trinity proved Dexter's attempt at normalcy made him vulnerable by killing Rita. Brian Moser hated Dexter rejecting his true nature. When Brian found his brother, he thought they could kill together without pretense. Brian hated Dexter rejecting Harry's code over their brotherhood. That rejection destroyed Brian. Dexter may have seemed like a hero, but to everyone close to him, he was a nightmare.